more often than not where communities, they throw together a project, but they don't think more than like 1 or 2 steps ahead. So I think that it's really important to look at your software very carefully as far as configuration management, what features you can use to manage the user base and to manage malicious activity. So I think that there's a lot to be done in that regard to think forward in that regard. So there's a lot of tools out there, and you could list them page after page. And so we only listed a couple that are really simple. Obviously, Snort and MRTG. I mean, that's
right.
Know how much bandwidth you're using, and Snort's all. And this thing keeps breaking a little bit. Okay, so monitoring is very important. Some people, projects, they throw up servers and they don't put in notifications or any type of monitoring. I mean, at the very, very least, you need to have notifications. So if something starts to go wrong, it'll let you know so that it gets fixed. I mean, because if your site's down or the server's down, you know, we've all seen the website's down.com, right? Maybe not. So, I mean, you really have to put some thought into this so that the right people are notified. You have to have the software and the charting, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do to maintain the stability. Because if your servers aren't stable, obviously no one's going to want to use it. People aren't going to stay on it. And I wish Twitter would go down more so that people would stop using it. But so one thing that's really important is the personnel. You know, you have to figure out who you're going to work with as far as like trusting them to have access to your particular devices or your servers. You know, so there's a lot to be said about who to choose, and obviously they have to be trustworthy and reliable. Because I run across, let's say, hundreds of people who always want to help and contribute, and that's great, but then they don't really have the time or the dedication to it, and so they can help out for a little while, and so they're not quite as reliable. So I try to not to be too strict on that. If someone wants to contribute to a project, I let them contribute in any capacity that they can. But as far as like having deep access or real privileges to keeping it up, you know, I only want people that are really serious about it. You know, definitely try to keep the number of administrators and people down. Like the more people that are involved, the more management's required and more communication that's required. So it's like if you're hosting an IRC network for like 150 people, you don't need like 40 operators. You know, and I've seen that, you know, so, and I've experienced that on both sides of the coin where you have too many people and you don't have enough. So over the time, I've learned that you just add them slowly and vet them to a certain point to make sure that they're going to keep up on their responsibilities and keep up with the tide as far as the growth and technology requirements. So there's a saying, too many chiefs and not enough Indians, but I changed it to Native Americans. I'm Native American. So that's the thing, you know, sometimes you have to find that perfect ratio between the number of users that you're going to host, or whatever community it is, to the number of moderators, administrators, server hosters, and stuff like that. And then you just have to work it. Each community is different. You have to find that sweet spot. And the big deal is just when you have too many operators or too many administrators, you know, the overhead gets just crazy, trying to maintain communication and maintain a constant goal. So
arguments.
I'm sorry?
Constant arguments.
Constant arguments, yeah. You know, and voting that takes like 14 days to get 8 people to decide on something.
Right, yeah,
you know?
that's, yeah.
Like, it's a little excessive. So one thing I've learned in a lot of different communities, I learned this way back in the day hosting BBS, is when I had co-system operators, sysops, you want to give your community the same answer. You know, so if they go and ask a question, they want to get the same answer if they ask multiple people, because otherwise it's confusing. People don't trust the administration. So I've learned that the hard way and seen it be very beneficial where if you have uniform administration with all your people that are involved, then things go a lot better. So one thing that I push really hard is offline communication. We all communicate online, but sometimes it's really good just to pick up a phone or get FaceTime. You know, I bother this guy all the time, you know, and vice versa. But it really is beneficial, and you have to have that. Even if you're a really tight-knit group on mailing lists and IRC networks, you do need to have FaceTime. You do need to have voice communication. It happens quicker, and you can get your thoughts across a lot faster. So I feel that's very important. You know, so uniform administration and communication on and offline is key. So these are a few of the combinations. You know, personnel, the hardware, the software. It all boils down to being able to make it work. So and of course support. You know, people don't consider this until it's like breaking. When you go with a provider, sometimes you want to run the support staff through their paces, know the network administrators, know the engineers, know what their capabilities are, know what their response times, at least so you have the expectations. So if something starts to go wrong, you know what your expectations are. They're going to fix it in a day. Versus, but I expected it in 20 minutes.
Right.
Well, you should have tested it.
And a lot of times, it's good to know if you can get in touch with a company, say it's an ISP that you're working with, or somebody's giving you internet access, to get on the phone and talk to engineers, get on a personal level with them. Because then whenever a bad thing does happen, for instance, like a denial of service, you have a contact that you can talk to who's almost like a buddy of yours, and you can say, hey, Bill, shit's hit the fan, I need help here, and he'll go out and to the appropriate routers upstream to start helping you out mitigate different types of attacks.
And sometimes like a 6-pack of beer to the network engineer or the knock monkey at your colo can run you a long ways as far as getting some help. And I've seen this too, where you have colo and you get DOS and they don't really know what you're doing, so they automatically assume that you're part of it or you're malicious, so they just unplug your box or no route you. Right. And I've seen this very often, even when you're paying lots of money for hosting. So I always found it's very beneficial to know the support staff, know the executive management, know the engineers, and as far as this slide goes, know the support for your software, for your hardware, your warranty options. This goes for nonprofit, hosting stuff out of your garage, as well as for the .coms and the big services out there. A lot of times they will drop the ball on that, and they don't consider that until like something actually breaks or it's really going wrong.
Right, and I actually had a situation because I had not set up those. I was with a new provider, and I was running the death row cluster, the Open VMS cluster, and we actually got an attack. And since I hadn't established those connections ahead of time, basically whenever I called them up, it was just a complete runaround. For instance, I was getting a UDP flood to a VAX in our cluster. And so I'm getting this UDP flood, and I'm on the phone with them, and they say, well, maybe your machine is infected. Well, number one, I've never seen really somebody's able to suck packets off of the internet and put them to my machine. So that was pretty interesting. So I asked them how technically that was working, and then she asked me, what version of Windows XP am I running? Is it patch level 3? And I told her it's Open VMS. And then they just kind of like,
blank face.
Yeah, like just put pause on everything. We don't even know
question
what you're talking about. Yeah, a big question mark. But I didn't have that already established with them. So that meant it took even longer because they were more confused about the hardware and the stuff that I had on my side. So it was a big pain.
And sometimes it can be just knowing who to call, know the right phone number, and test it. Call them up, say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and this is what I do, and explain to them why you host there and how cool they are. Totally social engineer them. 6-pack of beer, tell them they're awesome. I love your colo, man, it's rad. They'll suck it up, and they'll help you. And vice versa. You can help them, they can help you. So also emergency support options in a disaster recovery. Some people they lose their RAID or they lose hard drives, and they're like, I never did an offsite backup, and everything's gone. So you really have to think of this. It's not that difficult. So if you're going to host it yourself, consider these options. Disaster recovery. If that colo gets flooded, not with packets but water, you want to be able to move it and have other pieces of hardware, have other options, have other arrangements made. You got to think a few more steps ahead instead of just let's throw some boxes up and host a forum. It's like anyone can do that, but if you really want it to be stable and usable, you got to consider some of these options. So I'm big on disaster recovery. A lot of times professionally I'm called in to clean up other people's messes, and usually it's after a disaster. So I've seen a lot of disasters. And that's always fun to clean up someone else's mess. You get paid more, and you look good at the end. So BBSs, back in the day, I started a long time ago with BBSs. My first computer was an IBM XT with a 10 megabyte hard drive, and that was my first BBS. So I've been doing it a long time, and eventually grew that to a pretty large community, and ended up being multi-lines and a lot of good stuff going on that BBS. I learned a lot from it as far as maintaining the system ops, maintaining the user base and the forums, or not the forums, the message boards. It's been a long time since the BBS. So that's how I kind of started getting on with online communities, is cutting my teeth on that. And so I learned, very quickly, I had to have dedicated hardware. I had to have a dedicated phone line, because people started their BBSs like, call in between this time frame. Well, no one ever did that, They'll call your number 24 hours a day until the modem answers. So I learned very quickly as a kid that I needed dedicated hardware. I wanted to use my computer. I didn't want to have it running the BBS software all the time.
And then you also had to have a relationship with your POTS provider.
Yes, that was very interesting.